Welcome back to Fabric of Life, where we break down the molecules that make us, well, us. Today, we're going deep on albumin. I mean, this protein is everywhere in our blood.
You know, it really is amazing. It's such a basic part of us. But even for scientists who work with it all the time, there's still a lot of surprises.
I know, right? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. We'll go way back to when albumin was discovered, all the way to how it's being used in brand new medical treatments.
Yeah, so get ready for a journey through history and evolution, and even a bit of molecular biology.
It's going to be a wild ride. But before we get too far, let's start at the beginning. When did scientists first discover albumin?
Well, it's harder to say than you might think. Early researchers, they often confused albumin with other proteins, like the ones we find in egg whites. They called it all albumin.
Oh, so it's all mixed up.
Yeah, it wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that people started to understand blood albumin as, well, as its own thing.
So albumin had a bit of an identity crisis early on.
Exactly, and, it makes you think, what other scientific breakthroughs might be out there, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone to, really figure them out?
Ooh, I like that. I wonder what other scientific mysteries we're totally missing. But okay, so someone figures it out.
Yeah, so there's this guy, Auguste Comte. He initially thought albumin was outside red blood cells.
Okay. Not quite right.
Yeah, but science is all about being wrong sometimes. You learn from it. And luckily, in the 1860s, another scientist came along, Felix Hauptseiler. He was a chemist, a real pioneer in his field. He really nailed down our understanding of albumin. You know, how it was a major part of blood plasma. He isolated it and he characterized it. And that led us to where we are now.
Okay, that makes sense. So from egg whites to blood plasma, albumin has had quite the journey.
It has.
But before we go any further, I have a question. What about the ALB gene? What can you tell us about that?
It's like the instruction manual for this protein.
Right.
You got it. The ALB gene is the blueprint for albumin, and it's found on chromosome 4, specifically at location 4q13.3. And it's funny, this gene has a bunch of different names. It's like serum albumin, PRO0883, PRO0903, even FDAHT.
Wait, FDAHT?
Yeah, it's a mouthful. But these different names, they pop up in different databases, research articles. It can be kind of confusing. But if you're looking into albumin, it helps to know the different names it goes by.
Oh, for sure. Especially for all of our listeners who are physicians and scientists.
Yeah, they'll definitely run into it.
Okay, so I have to ask.
Yeah.
Because, evolution is fascinating. How old is albumin really? It's got to be ancient, right?
Oh, it absolutely is. Albumin is super well conserved throughout all vertebrates. Fish in the ocean, birds flying, everything in between. It's been around for millions of years.
That's amazing. So we're talking about a protein that is fundamental to vertebrates. Like we wouldn't be here without it.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that.
But hold on. You said conserved. But doesn't that mean similar, but not exactly the same? Are there different versions of albumin?
You're right. It's an important distinction. The main job of albumin is the same across different species. But there are variations, little tweaks in the amino acid sequence and the protein shape. It's almost as if evolution has fine-tuned albumin to perfectly match each animal that has it.
So cool. Evolution is like the ultimate engineer. Always tweaking, always optimizing. Okay, let's talk about what albumin actually does. We keep hinting at how important it is, so spill the beans.
Right, so albumin's a real multitasker. It keeps everything running smoothly in our circulatory system. One of its most important jobs is regulating blood plasma colloid osmotic pressure. I know it's a mouthful, but basically it makes sure we have the right balance of fluids between our blood vessels and the tissues around them.
Wow, so albumin is like the traffic cop of our blood.
Huh. Yeah, you could say that. It stops too much fluid from leaking out of our capillaries. It prevents that swelling you sometimes see. But that's not all. It's also a transporter.
I knew there had to be more. A molecule that important couldn't just have one job. What does it transport?
Well, it carries a lot of essential molecules around, like hormones, think of thyroxine, fatty acids, different metabolites.
Ah, so it's like the delivery truck of our blood, making sure all the important stuff gets where it needs to go.
Right, and it even delivers drugs.
Oh, yeah. So when we take medicine, albumin might be involved in making sure it gets to the right place in the body.
You bet. And the way albumin binds to a drug, like how strongly it holds onto it, that can really change how the drug works, how long it stays in the system, if it even gets to where it's supposed to.
That's incredible. Albumin is a real VIP in our bodies.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There are so many more cool things to talk about, like its enzymatic activity and its role in the immune system.
You've definitely got my attention. I can't wait to hear more.
Well, buckle up because there's a lot more to uncover about this amazing protein.
I'm ready when you are. Let's get into it. Okay, so where were we? Oh yeah, albumin and its hidden talents. Like you mentioned, it has some kind of enzymatic activity. I thought it was all about transport.
Right. It's pretty surprising. So on top of being this amazing transporter, albumin also shows esterase-like activity. Basically, it can act like an enzyme, speeding up certain chemical reactions in our blood.
Wow, that's fascinating. So it's not just moving things around, it's actually making things happen. What kind of reactions does it help with?
Well, that's the interesting part. It seems like albumin's esterase activity is pretty broad. It can work on a lot of different molecules. We're still figuring out exactly what all of this means, but it definitely adds another layer of complexity to albumin's story.
I bet albumin is like the Swiss Army knife of our blood. Speaking of complexity, what about albumin and the immune system? You mentioned that weird name earlier, FDAHT. It had something to do with the thyroid, right?
Yeah, FDAHD stands for familial dysalbuminemic hyperthyroxanemia. It's a condition that shows how albumin can mess with thyroid hormone activity. And then there's that EPIX4 peptide. It comes from albumin, and it seems to be involved in immune regulation. It's like albumin has this whole other life as an immune system player.
So wait, albumin is regulating hormones, it's transporting stuff, it's acting like an enzyme, and now it's messing with the immune system. It's like the ultimate multitasker.
I know, right? And we're still uncovering new things about it all the time. It's truly remarkable. So EPIX4, it acts as an inhibitor of this thing called the CXCR4 chemokine receptor. Basically, it's involved in how immune cells move around and talk to each other.
Okay, I'm trying to keep up. So albumin through EPIX4 is kind of controlling the immune system's chatter.
Yeah, you could say that. By influencing CXCR4, EPIX4 might be involved in fine-tuning our immune responses. Pretty cool, right?
Totally. But okay, let's shift gears a bit. What happens when albumin isn't working right? Like, what are the real-world consequences of albumin problems? We touched on this earlier, but can you go a bit deeper?
Sure. So even though albumin is so common in our blood, if it's not there or if it's not working properly, things can go wrong. Like take analbuminemia, for example. It's this rare genetic condition where people have almost no albumin in their blood.
Oh, wow, that sounds serious.
It can be. People with analbuminemia often have problems like edema, fatigue, and even high cholesterol.
It's incredible how important albumin is. I mean, we don't even realize it's there, but without it, things can really fall apart. What about those more common conditions like liver disease and kidney disease? I know those can affect albumin levels.
Exactly. Hypoalbuminemia, that's the term for low albumin levels. It's really common in those conditions, and it can make things even worse. It can make the symptoms more severe and make it harder to treat the underlying problem.
So just checking albumin levels can give doctors a lot of information about their patient's health.
Yeah. You bet. It's a simple test, but it can tell you a lot. It can be a really valuable tool for diagnosing and monitoring different health problems.
That makes sense. It's like a little window into what's going on inside the body. Okay, last time we also talked about FDH, that condition where albumin binds too tightly to thyroid hormone. Can you remind me what that's all about?
Sure. FDH, it's a reminder that it's not just about the levels of these molecules, it's also about how they interact with each other.
Right. It's all about these complex relationships.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears again. I'm really fascinated by the idea of using albumin as a medicine. We talked about it in drug delivery, but are there other ways albumin is being used to treat people?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Albumin itself can be given to people to help treat conditions like hypovolemia, that's when you have low blood volume, and of course hypoalbuminemia.
So if someone is low on albumin, doctors can just give them more.
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward solution in many cases. Albumin infusions can help to raise blood volume and keep blood pressure stable, and it can help to restore normal fluid balance and all those other important functions that albumin is involved in.
It's like giving the body a boost of its own natural healing power. But what about those super high-tech albumin-based drug delivery systems? That's where things get really futuristic, right?
Totally. So researchers are working on ways to attach drugs to albumin, kind of like creating a little package deal.
Like a molecular courier service.
Exactly. And by doing this, we can potentially make drugs more effective and reduce their side effects.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
What makes albumin such a good candidate for this?
Well, a big reason is that albumin stays in the bloodstream for a long time. This means that drugs attached to albumin will also stick around longer, giving them more time to reach their target and do their job.
So it's like giving the drug an extended pass to circulate throughout the body.
Exactly. Plus, albumin is really biocompatible. It's well tolerated by the body and doesn't usually cause any immune reactions.
So it's like a stealthy delivery system. I see why this is such a hot area of research.
It is. And there's another cool thing. Albumin can actually passively target certain tissues, like tumors.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, tumors often have leaky blood vessels, and albumin can slip through those leaks and deliver its drug cargo right to the cancer cells.
So we're talking about targeted cancer therapies with fewer side effects. That's incredible.
Are there any drugs like this already being used?
There are. Abraxane, that's one example. It's an albumin-bound form of the chemotherapy drug paclitaxel, and it's used to treat several different types of cancer, including breast cancer, lung cancer, and pancreatic cancer. Another example is Albutin, which is an albumin solution used to manage hypoalbuminemia and hypovolemia, especially in critical care situations.
Wow. It's amazing to think that albumin, this protein that's just naturally in our blood, can be used to treat such serious conditions. What's next for albumin research? Where are things headed? The future is looking bright for albumin. Scientists are always pushing the boundaries, looking for new ways to engineer albumin for even more specialized applications.
Give us a sneak peek. What are some of the things they're working on?
Well, a big focus right now is on developing recombinant albumin. That's albumin that's made in the lab using biotechnology, instead of being extracted from donated blood.
So we could have a more reliable and sustainable source of albumin.
Exactly. And it's also safer because there's no risk of transmitting any bloodborne diseases. Plus, when you make albumin in the lab, you can tweak it, engineer it to have specific properties that you want.
Like custom-designed albumin. That's so cool. What kind of modifications are we talking about?
Well, researchers are exploring ways to change the amino acid sequence of albumin to make it bind better to certain drugs, or to make it more stable, or even to give it completely new functions, like the ability to target specific types of cells or tissues.
Like molecular tailoring.
Yeah. And then there are these things called albumin nanoparticles. They're like tiny little spheres made of albumin, and they can be filled with drugs and delivered to specific locations in the body with incredible precision.
Albumin nanoparticles? That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It kind of is. And there's even research looking at using albumin as a scaffold for tissue engineering, basically, a framework that cells can use to grow and form new tissues.
Wait, so albumin could help us grow new organs?
It's definitely an area of active research, and it just shows how amazingly versatile albumin is as a biological material.
Albumin truly is a wonder of nature. From its diverse roles in our bodies to its ever-expanding therapeutic applications, it's clear that this protein is a scientific superstar. All right, we're back, ready to wrap up our albumin adventure.
Let's do it. We've talked about its history, how it works, how it can go wrong. Now let's get into how we can use albumin to actually diagnose and treat people.
Sounds good to me. So, diagnostics. I know doctors always check albumin levels in blood tests. But what do those numbers really tell us?
You know, it's pretty amazing. Checking serum albumin levels is such a basic test. It's simple and it's cheap, but it gives us so much information.
I guess that makes sense considering albumin is involved in so many important things.
Exactly. It helps with fluid balance, it transports molecules, it does so much. So if those levels are off, it's usually a sign that something's up.
Kind of like a warning light on your car's dashboard.
Yeah, pretty much. So for example, low albumin, which we call hypoalbuminemia, can be a sign of all sorts of problems. Liver disease, kidney disease, malnutrition, even inflammation. And then high albumin, though it's not as common, can sometimes mean someone is dehydrated or has a problem with their bone marrow.
Wow, so just looking at albumin levels can tell us a lot about the health of different organs and systems.
Absolutely. It's a really powerful tool. And because it's such an easy test to do, it's a routine part of a lot of checkups and disease monitoring.
That's amazing. So we've talked about how albumin levels can give us a general picture of health.
Mm.
But are there any specific diseases where albumin testing is particularly important?
Oh yeah, definitely. In patients with liver cirrhosis, for example. Keeping an eye on those albumin levels can help doctors figure out how severe the disease is and even predict if there are going to be complications.
Right, because cirrhosis can cause those low albumin levels. What about kidney disease? Where does albumin fit into that?
Well, albumin's a pretty small protein, and normally healthy kidneys do a great job of keeping it in the bloodstream. But if your kidneys are damaged, things can start to leak out, including albumin.
So if there's albumin in the urine, that's a bad sign for the kidneys.
It can be.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the first signs that someone's kidneys are in trouble is if you find even tiny amounts of albumin in their urine. It's called microalbuminuria.
Microalbuminuria. It sounds like something small, but it can mean big problems down the line.
Exactly. That's why catching it early is so important. If you find it early, you can start treatment and slow down the progression of kidney disease.
It's a great example of how paying attention to albumin can help us diagnose and manage diseases more effectively. Okay, so we've covered how albumin is used in general diagnostics and for monitoring specific conditions. Now let's talk about the really cool stuff. Personalized medicine, I hear albumin might have a big role to play in that.
This is where things get really exciting. Personalized medicine is all about tailoring treatments to each individual person, taking into account their genes, their lifestyle, their environment. And albumin, because it does so much and interacts with so many different molecules, it's becoming a really important part of this whole approach.
So how can albumin be used to personalize treatments?
Well, for one thing, we can look at a person's ALB gene. The sequence of that gene can tell us a lot about their risk for certain diseases, how they might respond to different medications, and even their overall health risks.
So we can use ALB gene testing to figure out the best way to keep someone healthy.
Exactly. Let's say someone has a gene variant that makes them more likely to develop liver disease. Knowing that information allows doctors to intervene early. They can recommend lifestyle changes, more frequent checkups, or even start treatment before the disease becomes a problem.
It's like having a custom-made health plan based on your own ALB gene.
Right. And we can also use this genetic information to choose the right medications. Remember how we talked about albumin binding to drugs? Well, that binding can be different depending on a person's genes, so we can use genetic testing to figure out which drug will work best for each patient and at what dose to get the best results and minimize side effects.
It's like finding the perfect key to fit that specific person's albumin lock.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just genetics. Albumin can also be used as a biomarker, basically a measurable indicator of what's going on in the body.
Interesting. What kind of things can albumin tell us, the biomarker?
Well, the levels of albumin, the structure of the protein, even how it interacts with other molecules, all of that can give us clues about a person's health. Think of it like a tiny detective, helping us track diseases, see how well treatments are working, and even predict what might happen in the future.
So we could use albumin to see, in real time, how a patient is responding to a particular treatment.
You got it. For example, in cancer patients, we can monitor certain molecules that are bound to albumin. This can help us predict how well they'll respond to chemotherapy or if they might develop resistance to the drugs.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like having a personalized early warning system for disease.
It is. And as we learn more about albumin, we're going to find even more ways to use it in personalized medicine.
Wow. Personalized albumin-based therapies, new diagnostic tools, biomarkers. It's amazing to think about all the possibilities.
I know, it's a really exciting time to be working on albumin research. It just goes to show that even the most common, seemingly simple molecules can have a huge impact on human health.
I think our listeners are leaving today with a whole new understanding of albumin. We've covered so much: its history, its functions, its role in disease, and how it's shaping the future of medicine.
It's been a fantastic deep dive. Albumin really is a testament to the power of scientific curiosity and the importance of always exploring the world around us, even at the smallest level.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And with that, we'll wrap up our exploration of the incredible world of albumin. Thanks for joining us on Fabric of Life. Keep those brains curious, and we'll see you next time.